This is a show about facing fear, unlocking courage, and taking action.
Courage isn't necessarily a daunting thing.
It's going to give you more purpose. It's going to give you more drive.
It feels like making a courageous decision is going to get you closer to who you aspire to be.
It's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage.
Most of business is like problem solving and error correction. So if people are afraid to either raise a problem or to say, we got this wrong, maybe we need to do this differently, you just stall the process and you just get stuck.
So this is the Courageous Podcast, and I sure hope that isn't a surprise in your ears, listeners. Right? But in the spirit of our name, I actually wanted to start off by sharing something personal and courageous to our guest today. And he does not know this is coming. Okay, let's be really clear. He doesn't know what I'm about to say. Our guest, who's the CEO of Eddie Bauer, Tim Bantle, officially 8 months in on the gig, on the new adventure. Congrats, I'm air quoting on adventure. But I digress back to a personal moment, and I wanted to sort of share this courageous moment du jour with you. And Tim, when we first met, and this is probably like 6 months ago now, if you think about it,
Yeah.
I really didn't want to like you. What a way to start a conversation. Way to make somebody feel warm and fuzzy. But look, it's truthful, and I'll give the backstory because I'm sure you don't know it and the guests don't know it.
Yeah.
It's rooted in shit that's happened to me in the past in interacting with leaders at the brand. And
Hmm.
so story time is that in my previous life, creative firm, we had pitched Eddie Bauer about 8 years ago, and we were the long shot. Nobody knew the heck we were, right? We were like throw them in, and what we learned is that we were liked. We were liked a lot. But we were not the safe choice. Ironically, we were courageous, right? We were not the safe choice, and then what was conveyed to us is that we came in second place, and this is like a one-way ticket to heartbreak land, right? Like,
Yeah.
for our team and for our culture. Now, look, life went on, and a year later, we once again got the call to once again pitch the business. Why we had to pitch the business again is beyond me. I'm not going to get into it, but okay, this time we win it. And it's like, yes. And finally, we have our opportunity. Actually, this is where I met your marketing rock star, Kristen Elliott. Hi, Kristen. And she's actually the one who connected us.
Yeah.
Well, very shortly, she's smiling and rolling her eyes, by the way, probably through this whole story. But very shortly after, politics kind of once again took off. It had nothing to do with Kristen. And to make a very long story short, it started like we were being jerked around from the top, or it wasn't they weren't as clear as they wanted to be. So I'll leave the sour grapes to a minimum. I've already talked too much about it. So, like, obviously, 6 months ago, Kristen is like, hey, you need to talk to our new CEO. He's perfect for the podcast. And I'm like, okay, last life triggered. I'm not sure if I want to talk with Tim. And then we got on the phone, we got on a Zoom, whatever we call this. And I'm here to report to the listeners that the current CEO of Eddie Bauer is both real and realist. And those are different, and they're both important. And I really, really appreciated just the way you think about business and life. And so I'm grateful that you're here. It's a long-winded way to say this is not a cold welcome. This is a warm welcome. Thanks for coming on the show, Tim.
Yeah. Thanks. Happy to be here. And I'll disclose one thing that I didn't know that I disclosed, but this is my first ever podcast. So I'm happy to, give this whole format a test run with you.
Great. And the first thing I say is like, I didn't want to like my guest. Way to go, Ryan. All right. So let's get into it, man. I mean, 8 months in, how's it going so far? Is it what you thought it would be? Is it not what you thought it would be? How's it rolling?
Yeah. I had lost track of this brand. I had been a customer probably in the 90s, as a kid. I don't know, maybe a teenager or something at that point, but I was not tracking this brand closely. When I got the call, I started poking around a little bit. And the outbound president and CEO was somebody I knew. And we had some history together in the industry. And, we had not followed up or talked a lot over the last, say, 10 years or so. But I started poking around when I got the call on the website, And I was like, man, the product looks really good. I was like, once you know product and you can cruise around a website, you can get a pretty quick, sense of quality and direction and what's happening. So like, product looks really good. Brand probably needs some work from brand identity, and the brand was looking really promotional. But as I stepped back and looked at it, I was like, this is 100-year-old OG outdoor brand,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't know if you were to count them up, if it took you just your fingers or your fingers and your toes, but it's something like that in terms of US or North American brands that are over 100 years old. And to be kind of the original West Coast outfitter just has a certain appeal. And so we were living in Canada, and I thought, this might be the opportunity to move back to the US. We wanted to get back into the US for some family reasons, and for my son who has some medical issues. And when this all came together, we essentially made the decision in a week to make this transition, move to the West Coast, move to Bainbridge Island. And I came in and met the team for the first time. And I just got to tell you, when I got here, there's a lot of long tenured people at Eddie Bauer, and I could just sort of had an immediate sense that the culture was familiar. The product is very familiar, the market is super familiar, but the culture inside of this place was super familiar. So it's been a really comfortable fit kind of from day one for me. And I mean, Kristen, who you mentioned, is one, but there are many people here who have been with the brand more than 10 years. And so there's a lot of deep knowledge about how to get things done and how to operate this business. And candidly, what we're working on is a plan to introduce the brand to the next generation. Um, and so that's consumed most of the last 6 months since I talked to you.
Again, 100 years old. We always say, legacy isn't a strategy; it's an asset. So, like, where's that? Do people care? You think the next generation's like, oh, now I'm going to pay attention because this is a 100-year-old brand, or like, how does it? Where does it help you, and where does it hurt you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that are fairly profound right away. Just from, if you were to just look at product quality and product integrity and product fit, a company that's been making product for 100 years knows how to make product. It's sort of built into the bones of the company. So that is a hardcore asset. The other thing is, this brand's gone through different ownerships and different business models, but it kind of came of age during the expansion of the mall, sort of these just dynastic mall moments across North America. And it essentially built out a store base that no other outdoor brands have today. And so we have this incredible store base infrastructure. So that's really cool. That's an asset, and it's part of sort of our unique proposition in terms of our ownership model as well. And then, lastly, it was originally a cataloger, but over the last many years, decided to essentially close down the catalog and shift to digital, and that's gone really well. And so the business is about half brick and mortar, about half uh, digital, and that's a really powerful combo. And so those are the things about the legacy that are helpful. Those are assets for sure. We're actually studying the brand right now and looking at rebranding and repositioning in the marketplace to, kind of address the next generation customer. And when we went out and talked to folks, the fact that the business was founded in 1920 to a person, they're like, that's really cool. We didn't know that. That's really impressive. You've got to trust a brand that's been around since 1920. And I think that, making great product and brand trust is kind of at the foundation of that longevity. So I see it as a big asset overall, and kind of uniquely ownable, Daddy Bauer.
I think it's almost disappointing to me, and you see how it happens. Like,
Yeah.
we're walking around life, and you see a store called Eddie Bauer, and you forget that this dude's a real badass dude. Like, Eddie Bauer is a real person. It's not just a brand. And
Yeah, that's right.
to your point, do people know his story and how
Company.
curious he is, and what an adventure he went on, and what he created? And again, I don't want to. We'll leave it at this. Like, yeah, live your adventure makes a lot of sense. It's the tagline, the mantra for the brand. And I think, in the spirit of jumping around a little bit today, I'd love to dance between the adventure you've lived as a human, as well as your path to becoming CEO Eddie Bauer. I mean, I do think you've lived an adventure. There's been mountains to climb, and there's been some hurdles you've had to overcome. So maybe we can go behind the curtain a little bit and like talk a little about your personal life, starting with So, like, where'd you grow up? How many siblings? Give me the tale of the tape.
Yeah. I grew up in the Midwest in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was one of 6 kids, 3 boys and 3 girls. And they jokingly called us the Bantle bunch often because it was like girl, boy, all the way down the line. So grew up in the Midwest. Sort of started climbing as a teenager with a high school math teacher who taught me and a few buddies how to climb back before climbing was a thing. And we started, as we got into our later high school years, we started defecting from team sports and growing ponytails and going rock climbing. And you wouldn't know it today, but it was pretty popular. And pretty soon we found ourselves taking all of the time that we had free to go and travel and climb in the summer or go skiing in the winter. And we were basically working jobs and saving money. And that was what we wanted to do. So that kind of, I did that through college. But when I went to school, it was interesting. I guess the one thing I would say is my life and career up to this point is totally an organic enterprise and a series of, I like to say, happy accidents. But the through line is I've been working in the outdoor industry basically since I was 18. And so like continuously, never with zero breaks in every capacity, from a retail store salesperson to a store manager to an outdoor educator guide to a wholesale to product to general management, and both in the US and Europe and Canada, and had some global jobs too, which means you basically win the Bad Dad Award and spend most of your time on an airplane. But it's been super interesting because I was admitted to business school 4 times to great programs, and on each occasion, my employer would come to me and say, "Don't do that, just do this instead." And there were doors that were opened because I happened to be there. And one of the things I remember early on is that opportunity kind of creates opportunity. And I've just been very fortunate to have had a string of, opportunities that each have kind of organically led to the next thing. And to get a hardcore business education by growing up in businesses and working in many different operating models and different brands and different countries and regions. So it's the things that I've done for work. I didn't even know were jobs when I was in school. I was a philosophy major and an English major. And my dad used to say, well, my sister went to art school and then I started studying philosophy, and my dad was sort of beside himself because he's like, "I'm paying for these kids to go to college. What the heck? Like, they're studying art and philosophy." And, I remember 20 years later, he says, "When people ask me what they should study in school now, I just tell them philosophy because I don't know what."
Well, I mean, it's inevitable when you have a Bantle bunch and there's 6 of you that someone is probably going to stray into art. It just happened to turn
Yeah,
into some pretty cool magic. And I'm curious, where were you in the order of the 6 siblings?
I was the second oldest. I have an older sister, and then I was the oldest boy.
And then what were the age differences between oldest and youngest?
My sister and I are 5 years apart. She's 5 years older than me. And then it's kind of almost 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years down the rest of the line, some ish.
I mean, what was dinner like? Was it just like every man and woman for themselves, just trying to take what you could off the plate, or like was it pretty harmonious?
I just remember there was a glass of spilled milk literally every night at dinner. Like I don't somebody spilled milk every single night. Then we had basically a cleanup sort of formula for what you do when the milk finally spills, and you just know it's going to happen at some point. You just don't know who's going to do
All right. So
it.
when you look at your career, like you said, it's cool. For by the way, I love learning that you just happen to be passionate about this space, and you know, years later, you're like, well, yeah, why would I not want to do what I love, just get paid for it? And when you look at your background, like you said, it is a little bit of that, like my friend is my enemy. Now, if you think about like you've been behind the curtain at North Face, I think you're 2 year GM at VF in Canada, which is Timberland, Vans, North Face, JanSport, many
Yeah,
others. Prior to
yeah.
that, 3 years at North Face in the US. Prior to that, and there was another stint, but there was like 7 years at Patagonia. I mean, you kind of know the space. You kind of know the arena. And I go back to the what I started with at the top, which was what I like most about you is that you're real and you're a realist. So the realist part is like understanding how all those other companies have playbooks and they're playing their playbook. and like you need to find your lane and find your space. Like,
Yeah.
do you feel like that's been? I mean, I'm sure you're still working on this, and
Yeah.
but like, where are you in the process of finding your white space and your lane?
It's really interesting having been in kind of three corporations: Patagonia, Black Diamond Equipment, and VF Corporation prior to coming here. So I guess this is my fourth kind of, company. Um, and, having like maybe 6 or 7 years per company, you get to kind of see a lot during that length of time. And one of the things that I remember realizing pretty early on is that when new executives would show up in a company, when I was earlier in my career, kind of young, like observing leadership behavior and what was going on, I kind of would see over and over again that people try to take the playbook from the old shop and apply it to the new shop. And I always just remember thinking, that's a bad idea, because each of these things have grown up, over 25, 50, 75, 100 years with a million different inputs and a bunch of different things that have led to what they are right now. You got to meet each of these brands on their own terms, right? And they're not all the same. They're actually meaningfully different, and their opportunities, even though their outdoor space is kind of one big space, each brand has to kind of forge its own path to stand out. I kind of think about, I don't know, lightning bugs or frogs, right? They all find that timing in the night to try to make their voice heard at a slightly different moment than everybody else. And it's not rocket science, but it's not easy, if that makes sense. So, my biggest motivation in joining Eddie Bauer is to sort of meet the brand on its own terms, and then fashion and kind of strategy from there.
I appreciated the frogs and lightning bugs. Like anytime, do you now intentionally only use outdoor metaphors to
Yeah, I
explain
can.
it?
I can do that all day long. It's better.
So for any leader that's listening, 'cause I think we have two very unique types of people that listen to the show. I think you've got one that's there. They're there or they're on their path and they've got clarity and they want to push themselves. They want to be a better leader. And I think you've got another group that's kind of just getting started, and they're looking for their way and they've got something in them. It just hasn't been fully defined yet. And so for anyone that's listening and you've been on the gig for 8 months, like what are your like three steps to making sure you don't mess up or you hold true to the organism that was versus just bringing in a whole new playbook?
This is probably a consistent theme if you were to query folks who've worked for me before. I ask a lot of questions and I'm not bashful about it at all. So I probably spent 4 months just almost continuously asking questions in this business. And so I find that that's really important. And every week by doing that, I learn every day, but every week I learn new things and sometimes profound things that I go home for the weekend, just like thinking about, because what was said when I asked this question, somebody had an opportunity just to speak up and say something, it just kind of a light bulb goes off. So, I think being curious is really, really important in leadership. And tell me again, what was the actual question? Because I started going off on this. So,
Well, I
what are
took
the three
away.
things that make you don't, so you don't screw up in the early days?
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, it's not really about screwing up. Like, what's your
well,
onboarding process, right?
you're definitely gonna make some errors. There's no doubt about that. One of the things that I am like super super keen on with teams is creating an environment where people aren't afraid, because most of business is like problem solving and error correction. So, like, if people are afraid to either raise a problem or to say, we got this wrong, maybe we need to do this differently, you just stall the process and you just get stuck. And so I try, even through kind of levity or asking questions or sh- showing my ignorance on a topic, to try to create an environment where people feel free to talk. And that is always a long process depending on how people have had leadership in the past, right? I mean, what I do find is that different folks have different styles, and we actually did a leadership kind of style survey, if you will, among our senior team here, and it was really cool because that exercise together was done with don't know if you know who Ray Dalio is, but Ray was like the ran one of the biggest hedge funds in the world. And he then started to take what he learned running that and apply it to organizational dynamics, and has an entire process. We did that process his process as a team, and it puts very concrete language around your leadership style in general. And my leadership style is as a shaper. I like to have a vision of the endpoint and then just start moving in that direction. But I lean really heavily on really strong operators inside the business to do that. And so, in many cases, you have to defer to those operators on the best way to get from point A to point Z, but continue pointing the direction where you want to go. So you can avoid a lot of pitfalls that way by relying on that expertise that's around you. And this company has a lot of expertise, a lot of tribal knowledge in it.
I mean, I have to imagine that's refreshing for the team. And I'm not even talking about the past president, but in the past, before the past president, it was a very different style of leadership and play. And have you heard from your team that it's refreshing that they get to be part of creating and, what is shaping this discovery or this adventure?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I hear from some. Some people are more stoic and some people are more expressive, but I think overall, listen, like the command and control style of leadership, which was the model of a CEO for a long time, right? It doesn't really work for the next generation. And to believe it or not, and I've said this to my wife, and I'll disclose something personal. I've never been able, candidly, to kind of manage hierarchy very well in my own head. And the notion of uh, asserting hierarchy on folks doesn't feel right to me. And so I just tend not to do that in a group. Like, this isn't the decision because I said so is not an answer. It's not a reason for being. And so, but for some folks, depending on where they are in their life, their own style, how they operate, who they worked for in the past, people respond to that differently. But I would say directionally, um, I just want to create an environment where really talented people can do their best work, and we're all moving in the same direction. And I told this team when I got here, I was like, the number one thing that is my responsibility is making sure that we all understand what we're trying to achieve together, and that you have the resources to do it. Right. Like I'm not the guy with 100 of the greatest ideas. I'm the guy who's synthesizing those things for the group and helping the group think about them. And so we spent a lot of time on that, and they've they now laugh because when we started meeting, one of the things I try to do, I came back. I'd never been to a pro basketball game. I don't know if I told you this, but I stopped playing and following professional sports when I started rock climbing, and so it was like grow the ponytail, start following the dead, don't don't pay attention to professional sports. Well, now I have young boys, and all of a sudden, professional sports is like a thing, and they love it. And we took them to a basketball game over the holidays, and I'd never been to a pro game before. And we kind of splurged and got tickets kind of close. It was the Warriors game in Portland. So we were kind of down, kind of close to we could see the guys pretty close. We showed up when, Draymond's doing shooting drills, right? And my boys are just like, oh my God, that's incredible. Like Jordan Poole is out there shooting right now. Their Steph was hurt that day. Anyway, long story short, the most overwhelming thing for me watching pro basketball, which is, and I don't use a lot of sports analogies, but is maybe one of the most profound expressions of teamwork that you can see, is these guys are just touching each other all the time. They're just in continuous physical contact with one another. And what I realized, like watching that go down, and candidly, as we were thinking about the future of work here at the office and physical interaction with people and engagement, I thought a lot about how connected those guys are on the field or on the court, and how intimate they are with one another, how close they are, and how that helps them sort of do what they do. Like they can't do it. Like why does everybody slap hands at the foul line every single time? On TV, I was like, I don't get it. You go and watch it, and you're like, I understand now. This is all about basically syncing their brains and bodies up. And essentially, in the job that I'm in, largely that's what I'm doing. I'm like helping this group sync its brain up with one another so that we have kind of a shared sense of what we're doing. And for me, that's like a lot of fun, right? Because we've got specialists in every function who are 10 times better at those functions than I'm ever going to be. But this, bringing that crew together so that everybody has a common understanding of what you're doing is like 80% of my job.
Yeah, it's funny. I This is not an advertisement for just Eddie Bauer or Get Outside or Live Your Adventure, but it's funny that like every single time I've ever done that, there is some relationship
Yeah.
built that there's like a multiplier when we actually get away from a screen and actually, and it is touching. Like you go back to the touching thing, and there's a moment where it's like I'm touched by this conversation or I'm touched by this experience. The word touch point doesn't do it, by the way. Like a touch point somehow got lost in the. It almost sounds really transactional, but
Yeah.
how do you create an environment where people are touched by the work they're doing and are connected on the work you're doing, and maybe that's the opportunity. Eh, Do you see like what have you learned so far from the Dahlia work too? Like, are you creating intentional moments where I was going to say touch points, but where connections are really going to another level, and are you seeing the adoption and the buy-in from the team since you've been there?
I think so. I'll be super candid. We're in a temporary office and we've been slow to return to the office because we're getting ready to do a full rehab. And so we are not back as physically together as I think we need to be for the future. I was and being on the West Coast compared to the East Coast, there's a bit of a lag in going back to the office. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I see
Yeah.
it's because we have a parent company on the East Coast, and then we have what's happening here, and the work cultures are different, and the pace of the return to work is different. And we've got this obstacle, which is we just moved and we have to do a rehab, which is kind of in the way from everybody kind of being able to get together and vibe. And everyone's got multiple years of pandemic life, and people get stuck like in their pattern. They've got their flight path from morning, noon, and night at home. They're comfortable in it, and we're trying to get folks kind of back together. But I was actually listening to an interview with Ezra Klein, and I forget the woman's name who he interviewed. Who just wrote this book called Hanging Out, but you should check it out because the
Okay.
interview was really powerful. But one of the things she said, and it struck me as true, was that people, because they turned inward into this very insular life during the pandemic, they are now trading their own individual comfort for their long-term well-being. And I think that we have to come to terms with that overall and what the right balance is for long-term well-being. But I say to our teams, listen, we're a retailer, we're a product company, we're an outdoor company. There's no way you're getting this done to the level at the highest level of the industry from your bedroom. It's just not going to happen. We got to be working physically together to solve these problems. So we're going through phase change from pandemic to post pandemic, and I think everybody personally is in the midst of that as well.
So let's say, between pandemic and the reality of, you're 8 months in, right? Fire hose time, right? Let's say someone from your team's listening to this. What do you want them to know about this adventure that maybe you haven't shared with them yet? Or they've yet to pick up on just because, like you said, they're working out of their bedroom and doing the best they can. And sometimes it's a little bit more transactional than you want because they've got deadlines. Like if you step back, is there something you want to make sure that they hear directly from you?
I think my underlying motivation in all my jobs so far, when I've gotten into these senior leadership roles where you've got smart, capable, you know, just admirable people that work for you, is that you just want them to have basically the best time that they can have and do the best work that they can do. You just want the more than anything, you want their work to be gratifying for them, right? And that is something that's more, you can never pay people what they're worth, like period, right? But if people feel good about their contributions and the work they're doing, and like it's directed towards something that matters, I think that goes a real long way. So that's kind of we just relaunched our kind of brand positioning internally. I don't know if I can disclose it, but like where we're
Right.
headed, what's going to be different and new going forward, and our new brand identity. We literally a week ago we showed the internal team because we're ordering sale samples and product and all of those things. And ultimately that brand positioning and the culture of our work, I want to be one thing. And ultimately that's about being an authentic, inclusive, broadly accessible outdoor brand. And if we can take, that and we can people feel that at work, it's gonna matter. They'll appreciate it. And that's all I really want for people to do when they come here.
I'm curious to see if I'm gonna have to take that last part out. I mean, like, note to Ryan, that like, let's leave that part out till we launch it. But I love that. There's no fear in what you said, and I'll tell you what, the reason that I left agency life, like left it behind, was because I kept getting the phone call. Can I tell like a story for a brand that may not be authentically true to the inside culture? They wanted us to tell the world why they were sliced bread, but like on the inside, it was that's not what was happening.
Yeah.
There was no alignment. And so, one of the things I've been playing around with, and I'm curious to get your thought on this. It's like brand awareness is one thing. When we talk about brand awareness, that's an external idea. But really, what I think we're best at is self awareness, brand self awareness.
Yeah.
What is the self awareness? What do we want to be known for on the inside, and then get it perfectly in alignment with what we're telling the outside world? And to your point, how you get people to like really light up and do the best work of their life is when they're doing what they're passionate about for brands they believe in. And it
Yeah.
sure sounds like it's almost like an eclipse, right? Like
Yeah.
brand self-awareness and then brand awareness. Can you get them in alignment? Uh, I'm really curious to see how you do, where you take it.
I
It's
don't
a,
think there's anything I just said that you can't play because I don't there's nothing
yeah.
like there's no secret there that can't be disclosed. It's kind of how we're addressing the brand today, but it's how we're going to fully bring it forward and say 24 and beyond. But I just don't want there to be any daylight between those two things. What we want to be in the world and what people feel when they're in the building.
So, did you always know? I like this term called body jumping. Like you jump outside of your body and you look back at your body. So, self awareness, right? Like when you look back at it all, do you like, oh my gosh, CEO Tim Bantle? Like, did you see this as a path for you? Did you always want to be a CEO?
No, I wanted to be a professor. So I mean, and then I wanted to be, I wanted to be a mountain guide. And then I was like, oh, I got to make some money and pay the bills and have some health insurance and some life insurance and pay for a car and the commercial reality of life. I sort of was able to kind of bring those things all together into one thing. You know, I I've sort of naturally been in leadership positions most of my life, but I don't think I've ever really intentionally sought them out. They just occurred. And and since I've been maybe 17 or 18, I've had people that were older than me reporting to me because I wind up in some position of responsibility more than anything, right? And I remember sitting with my admin crew here one day, and I was like, "Hey, listen," because they were a little like, "Hey, where would you like your coffee placed?" When you come in more, I'm like, "Don't worry about my coffee, I got this." The really interesting thing was, I was like, "I have a job in this company just like everybody else. My job's just different." Right? But like I don't really see this job as a more like as something to chase for status. It's just like this is a different type of job, and it just happens to be the type of job that I like. And I've kind of over the last 15 years, I've just become more and more and more a generalist, where I can engage with kind of any part of our business and go deep with them. But I need the other people in the business to do those activities, actions, work, whatever. And so it's just it's just been a natural evolution. I know people go to school and they go to business school and they're like, I want to be a CEO. I never had that thought once in my life. Never, like exactly zero times. But what I did find as I went through jobs, and this was really interesting because I do think that very deeply in people's psyche is seeing things they like and then wanting to emulate those things, right? And I can remember at each stage in my life, from retail to guiding to wholesale to product to general management, looking at somebody who was doing one of those jobs, maybe at my first time working with a authentic mountain guide, or my first time engaging with a really high quality sales rep, or my first time seeing a product manager do their gig, or the first time I've seen a CEO address the company. And I can remember kind of at each successive time along the chain, looking at that and going like, I could do that, and that would be really fun. I think I could do a good job. Like that looks really interesting to me. And I've let that kind of curiosity be the path, if you will. And so here I am. I got the fancy title and CEO, but I don't know that I ever once, maybe prior to a couple of years ago, was like, I want to be a CEO. That's my mission in life. It's just never occurred to me, candidly. So when I say it's sort of a happy accident, or like essentially a lot of good fortune and opportunity creates opportunity, it's been at each successive opportunity, you kind of get a different view of the possibilities ahead of you. And just been super fortunate to have some really awesome jobs and some really great companies.
It makes sense though about the professor comment, because it's almost like the Russian dolls, those Russian dolls that like layer on, like inside this CEO version of you is a Russian doll version of you,
Sure.
where
Yeah.
like, because I think about it, you said like the importance of questions, like a great professor is guiding conversations and like look, trying to get the most out of their people, right? It's not about the professor, it's about everybody else. And so you can sort of see how that metaphor is playing in your particular role just from what you're sharing with me. Now, there's a line on the website that you guys have right now. I'll be curious to see if it now changes or not, depending on where you're going. But I like the line. It's we're on a mission to inspire, enable, and empower everyone to experience the outdoors and live their adventure. Can you
Yeah.
give me a little bit about what that stands for?
Yeah. So one of the things that kind of a wise mentor of mine once said is you can change everything about your company except for your reason for being. And and I think that's true. You have to, as a CEO, you have to be willing to change everything about the company except for the reason for being. And that's the reason for being at Eddie Bauer. And candidly, all of the updates to the brand strategy and our forward position in the market is to try to live that completely, to just to basically embody that. Um, and uh, and so that that's a pretty powerful idea. And one of the things I kind of often like to kind of zoom out on, if you believe that the data that the Outdoor Industry Association shares, about 1 out of 2 Americans kind of participate in outdoor activities, right? And when I think about outdoor activities, I think the big tent of outdoor activities. I don't mean just climbing the Mount Rainier behind me, but all of the different things we do outdoors that kind of are rejuvenative and that we use for the types of connections you described earlier, et cetera. And so that means I don't know, the 330 or 50 million people in the United States, like half of them are potential Eddie Bauer customers. And candidly, I think the other half's lives would be improved if they spent some more time outside too. I think we see that, and we're going to continue to find out more and more about that as we deal with the impacts of COVID and digital addiction and all of these things. That like connecting to the natural world is really powerful for people. And so, I mean, I kind of think that total addressable market's kind of everybody, but at a minimum, it's half of everybody. And I think everybody's quality of life is improved by spending some time outdoors. And candidly, during the pandemic, I think people got a chance to do more of that. They got a chance to take a longer walk in the morning with their spouse or with their dog, or even just being outside was a form of safety in some cases. And so people were doing that, and ultimately, all the things we do inside this business are in support of it. Now, outdoor being the an outdoor brand or participating in kind of the sharp end of outdoor sports, let's be clear, is a pretty elitist activity. Like paying $70,000 to go be guided up a big peak in Asia is something that you know a half of a percent of humanity can do. And most of the market, when you look at the outdoor market, is piled up around that front end of, if you were to look at the normal distribution of adoption of either technology or sport or fashion or whatever, most of the whole market is spending all of their time on the very small front end of that distribution. We want to just spend our time on the very middle of that distribution where everybody is, because we think that this is the outdoor lifestyle, and access to outdoor activities is a quality of life and personal enhancer for everybody. So that's it's kind of cool. It's like we're going to reboot this thing and kind of reintro it to the world, um, and the mission's going to stay exactly the same.
I mean, it's hard to change our behavior. I mean, it's like one of the
Yeah.
hardest things to do, right? Like, and it makes sense. If your vacuum broke 6 times, you're probably not using that vacuum again. Like, that's logic, right? And so, and in the past, before your time, I guess it's inevitable. If your brand's been around for 100 years, sometimes we're going to go off the beaten path. And it's felt cloudy. You walk into any Bauer store sometimes and like which part's for me? So
Yeah.
is that part of this? Is that like, do you feel like maybe this is the moment of courage? Like, because it sounds like it's for everybody, and or half the country, right? Needs to get is going outside, and half isn't right now. But how do you like lock in on? Oh, that's what Eddie Bauer really is all about, and how do you clearly let me know that when I thought it was something else?
Yeah. You know, I have a handful of like, they probably call them Timisms around here or something now. So like, I think always when a return to the origin of a brand is always a healthy exercise. And one of the things when I got here, there was this book. It's called The Legend of Eddie Bauer. There's one sitting at my desk here somewhere, but I started reading this. I get in, about 7 a.m. and it's pretty quiet around here. And I started reading a few pages of it every morning before I started hammering on email and dealing with, phone calls and stuff. And in the early pages, I found a direct quote from Eddie Bauer when he was being interviewed about what he was trying to do in his first store in downtown Seattle. So here's a guy. He grew up on an island out in Puget Sound. His parents split up. He moved to Seattle. He was a teenager. He needed to get a job to help support the family. It was the 1920s, or I guess it was 1910s, because he ended up founding Eddie Bauer in 1920. And so he gets a job at a sporting goods store, learning like how to string tennis rackets and start selling fishing gear and stuff like that. And he eventually starts his own shop called Bauer Sports. And this quote from him was the kind of point of origin for how we're thinking about this thing go forward. And it was some version of, to us, people are all the same, whether it was like the wealthiest business people or the people from all over the world with fancy titles, or members of the fire department and the police force, or bootleggers and rum runners, or Native Americans who came in from the reservation. We only wanted one thing, which was for them to have a great experience and come. And we would go out and hike and camp and hunt and fish with them. Like, and that was like what he was trying to create at his store, was that. And it's literally in the like it's the only quote that I found. Like the first quote I found from Eddie Bauer was that. I was like, well, this is obviously the thing. This is the thing right here. Like, just stop. You don't have to go anywhere else. This is the thing. So come back to that point of origin. What was he initially trying to do? And it's just extremely timely in culture. And it's very appropriate. It's very true for this brand. And I joke with the team whenever we're dealing with some hardship. I was like, when you do things that are on brand, you make money. And when you do things that are off brand, you lose money. Or another corollary is when you do things that are on brand, it's enjoyable. And when you do things that are off brand, you suffer. And so I'm always like, are you suffering right now? Well, maybe you're not actually in alignment with what you really ought to be doing with this thing. Right. And so, and then there's always implementation and execution. If you're really, really struggling with anything in a business, you need to come back and go like, are you really lined up with what this thing is supposed to be? And so that was a profound moment. I remember sitting here drinking coffee on a rainy Seattle morning, and I was like, the light just went off. I was like, ding, 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 ding. And then I spent some time sussing out this with the VP team and doing some deeper conversations around it. And we decided, yeah, this is the thing that we're going to rally around, go forward.
So before I let you go, there's this famous proverb that fear and courage are kin. Like you don't get to courage without first channeling it through fear. And so whether it was something before taking the job or something you've stumbled into over the last 8 months, where's the fear? Like, what are you afraid of? And then uh, I'll give you the second part of it. Has there been a moment of courage that you felt or that you're about to take action on? Because I know something's coming. And can you share both what the true, maybe they're not even connected. So let's start with the fear. Like, what were you afraid of, or is there a particular fear that keeps you up at night?
Yeah. When you ultimately have to be the person who stands behind decisions, right? You've got to own those things. And we this company is in kind of new ownership structure. We're going through a kind of a business model change, and we're relaunching the brand identity. All it's like a full meal deal. So the magnitude of what we're doing here is actually bigger than what I knew when I started. And this is always the case. You always come in and you're like, it's this. Then you get in, you're like, no, it's that plus like this other stuff that has to happen for this thing to work. And the strategy that we articulated was wholesale. Like, and I have a background in businesses that had both direct and wholesale, pretty deep direct and wholesale businesses, but this has been a pure direct business for basically 100 years. And the strategy was get into wholesale as your growth strategy. And as a CEO, you have to have a growth strategy. Like I mean, we talked metaphysically about a bunch of stuff, but ultimately your job is to make the thing go. And and given the economic environment, like you gotta grow and you gotta expand your profitability in order to kind of stay afloat in these environments. And run a business that makes money is hard. So if there's something that I worry about, it's like, hey, that's my responsibility. Ultimately, the financial outcome for the business is my responsibility to bear. And you've got to keep that as a front of mind exercise, especially in climates like we're in right now, which are really, really hard for consumer. I mean, they're inflationary environments, and I've spent a lot of time studying this since the pandemic, but they're very difficult on product-based companies or consumer goods companies. Because essentially product costs expand while at the same time sales velocity often slows down, and that means that your business really gets squeezed in the process. And so that's the natural effect of any business in an inflationary environment. And those candidly, those are the very practical things I worry about, because that's my job. That's no one should worry about that stuff more than me.
And so the fear is not hitting the numbers, the reality of coming off, is it inflation this year, or are we back from the pandemic? Is this like a swirl of all of the above?
Just having a business that's successful. I mean, I think the thing is, if you say, like, what's the fear of not being successful? Well, why does that matter? The reason it matters is for everybody. It's like if the business is successful, it's very difficult on everybody in the business. And if the business is successful, it's way easier on everybody in the business. And so, as a CEO, you want to make sure that you have success. And it's not about your ego. It's not about your resume. It's really about the feeling that people have when they work inside a company is exponentially better when you're having success, and it's exponentially worse when you're not. So that's what I that's what I worry about, or fear, if you will.
And so that, to flip it to that moment of courage that you've even taken action on or about to, what can you share?
Well, it probably comes back to this kind of wisdom I learned from one of my mentors a long time ago, which is like you can change everything about you. You have to be willing to change everything about a business except for your reason for being. And I find myself in a position where it's like we're looking at everything, like fundamentally everything from brand positioning and strategy, logo and identity, retail pricing strategy, marketplace management strategy, product mix. Like just like we have to you have to be willing to look at everything, and then you have to build a plan. And you can only do a couple of things per year, right? If you will, but that is the part that takes some courage, and you have to not be when you're making those courageous kind of decisions around being willing to change whatever needs to change to be successful. You just can't operate from a place of fear anymore. You have to operate from a place of what's the opportunity here. And so I try to keep the team focused on that. What's the opportunity here rather than what are we afraid of here? Because that locks people up.
Look, we're kind of at time here, but I want to commend you on one of the things you just sort of rolled out, which is you can create a plan, but realistically, you can't do everything right away. And we're back to the real and the realist. I'll call it like it is. That there are certain companies that even I'm working with, and the priorities list is like a scroll. And you're like, have you prioritized the priorities?
Yeah.
You have to prioritize the priorities. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. And I'm sure your people do. Again, I'm not behind the curtain with it, but I'm sure they appreciate how intentional you are like I said, I didn't want to like you, and I did right away. And no, I'm rooting for you. This Eddie Bauer story is such a cool story,
Yeah.
and it's just letting the universe really hear it. And like success is them almost going, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. And then to your point, the product is actually really good. Again, I don't want this to come off as an ad. Just go check out the website, go check it out yourself. By the way, if you have a question for Tim that you like, you wanted to ask, send it to me. And if it's, we'll vet it. And Tim, I'll send it to you. And I think what we've learned about Tim today is he's open-minded and he's curious, and all he wants is what's best for Eddie Bauer. So thanks so much for coming on the show. Keep living your adventure over there, and let's stay in touch.
All right, man. Good to talk to you. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Courageous Podcast. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so more people can find us. See you again next week.